Hey there, Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, we've got another conflict that needs context to understand. So we're headed back to Warfronts because this conflict is what's going on right now between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Original video is going to be linked below. I'm open to learn from it, add anything I can, and I hope to do both. Make sure to sub to my new Originals channel. A lot of great, fun original history content. Mr. Terry Originals, link down below. Let's get started. All right, I don't want to repeat a lot of things right now that may get talked about in the video, but I'm hoping some context is talked about. If he doesn't go back to it, going back to the 1800s with what's called the Great Game, as Britain and Russia were both competing for what today is Afghanistan. There are routes that can go back to that. There's also routes, a lot further, but that being one of the more immediate dominoes. And then definitely into the British colonial era, especially when the British leave India, Pakistan gets its independence, etc. So we'll see what's up here. But we can go back to ancient times with the indigenous Pashtun people, which are going to be a major part of this. Hopefully get some opportunities to do that. So let's learn together and let's do it.
4 years after the disastrous departure of the United States, the nation of Afghanistan is just inches away from war. This time, however, it's not the Americans that the nation's Taliban rulers have to worry about. Instead, Afghanistan faces the threat of an adversary far closer to home. It's considerably more powerful neighbor to the southeast, Pakistan. Over the course of the last several days, Afghanistan and Pakistan have engaged in multiple rounds of deadly border violence, and although the total death toll isn't yet clear, it may have already climbed into the multiple hundreds. Pakistan is...
By the way, I think this conflict has really gone under the radar. It definitely went under my radar. I can tell that. Not to say that if I don't know about something, other people don't, because I think it's gonna be seen far more as of regional importance. Especially in countries like the United States have, disavowed the Taliban in a very complicated relationship with Pakistan. Anyway.
Dropping bombs across the city of Kabul, the Taliban is moving tanks to the border, and at the very moment that this episode is released, a brittle ceasefire is expected to lapse in less than 24 hours' time.
I know some of the transportation routes are closed up. Is the Khyber Pass stopped right now? One of the most important passageways from Afghanistan into Pakistan. Has been for millennia, by the way. Back to the weeb fronts thing. Talked about that in the last Warfronts video, whatever that is.
Escalating conflict fire is expected to lapse in less than 24 hours' time. For the second time in 2025,
ceasefire now.
The nuclear arms nation of Pakistan is engaged in a cycle of escalating conflict against a next-door neighbor. And this time, the human devastation on all sides could turn out to be far worse.
Yeah. Countries with deep militaries. We know what the Taliban and Afghanis will do. We saw fight off the Americans for 2 decades. We've seen Pakistan with their military posture, with their continued heightened tensions with India. These are countries with a lot of, militaristic pride in one form or the other.
All right, in order to understand
how much context are we going to get?
Pakistan right now, we've got to understand the difference between 2 distinct groups. The Afghan Taliban, who've ruled the nation of Afghanistan since America's withdrawal in 2021, and the Pakistani Taliban. Right now, the Pakistani Taliban are similar to what the...
I kept saying Pashtun because they're caught in the middle of a border drama that's gone on for decades. But anyway, hoping to get a chance to talk about that, but...
withdrawal in 2021, and the Pakistani Taliban. Right now, the Pakistani Taliban are similar to what the Afghan Taliban used to be, an asymmetric insurgency hiding out in the hills and blending in with the region's population of ethnic Pashtuns, while they carry out unpredictable attacks that can, at times, be devastating. Right. Officially, the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban are 2 distinct groups, and Afghanistan formally denies providing any form of support to the Pakistani Taliban, who regularly carry out terror attacks against Pakistan's military, its internal security forces, and its civilians.
This is where they're both, going to accuse each other of complacency, where it's like, control your insurgents. You control yours. If you're not going to do it, we're going to do it. We can't do that because it ruins, hurts our sovereignty. But it's like, well, it's causing problems here. You know what I mean?
But the Pakistani Taliban frequently crosses into Afghanistan for safe haven. Outside analysts widely believe that it does receive support from its Afghan counterparts, and Pakistan uniformly rejects Afghanistan's attempted denials, instead insisting that the Afghan Taliban fully back their Pakistani counterparts with the financial support of Pakistan's arch nemesis, India. That's a major point of tension between Islamabad and Kabul, and while the two nations have tried to maintain a very shaky state of peace, neither nation has any trust for the other's government.
All right, I'm not seeing any deep context going on here. And maybe there was an earlier video I missed, and maybe there was that did talk about the deeper issues. One of the major ones when you're talking about long-lasting context is the ethnic divisions in this area that do not match the political borders. The Pashtun people, who are like indigenous people to this region, there are 60 to 70 million of them, and they are divided by this border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I'm going to pull up a map here right now that shows you what I'm talking about, how this large population of millions of people is split by this border. Now, where did this border come from? This is called the Durand Line. It's the border right now between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, that was agreed upon by the British being one when India got, and back then India and Pakistan were unified under British rule. When Pakistan also gets its independence, this border was brought in as a political border, again, supported by the British in the decolonization process, which in fact, Afghanistan has never officially agreed to this border. So it's dividing their big ethnic group. And because of that, you're going to have insurgents, which has happened there. The Pashtun people are so big, you could have a very formidable nation created out of them. However, you can see the border problems there. Pakistan would have to give up, a ton of territory, which, they're not going to want to do, which is why you're going to have groups inside of these borders that are going to be against these countries here. And even the Afghanistan situation, to go back deeper, is what was called the Great Game. The Great Game was this competition between the Russians, who had control of north of Afghanistan. Then you had the British coming up from India, and both competed for this territory, basically fought for it in the 1800s, which the Afghani people, like they have done many times, have repelled against those foreign incursions to maintain their autonomy. But the colonization process, again, bringing up borders that didn't bring in necessarily ethnic divisions, but focused on political divisions and political agreements, has once again brought in modern conflicts. Let's continue.
Okay, so with that critical context in mind, we can identify the time, the place, and the mechanism by which this entire regional breakdown got started. On the 8th of October, a Pakistani military convoy was ambushed by the Pakistani Taliban as it traveled near the Afghan border. After the convoy was hit by multiple roadside bomb blasts, Pakistani Taliban fighters engaged Pakistan's troops in a gun battle, killing a total of 11, including multiple officers. Initially, Pakistan offered a different version of events, although it now appears that the convoy ambush, as claimed by the Pakistani Taliban, is what really happened. The next day,
this is the stuff we hear about every modern conflict we talk about. There's always some kind of there'll be a violent attack that happens, and the government is going to say, well, we had nothing to do with that. Those were lone wolves or something like that. But then the opposing people were like, okay, well, we don't care. I mean, really, if you support it or not, it's happening in your territory. They're operating out of your territory. Do something about it. Then it becomes this mutual justification for each other's political, dilemma and problems, which just becomes this ping pong of retaliation and blaming.
Over the 9th, Pakistan is believed to have carried out an airstrike in Kabul targeting the leader of the Pakistani Taliban, longtime Emir Noor Wali Massoud. Pakistan denies that it was behind the airstrike, and verified audio recordings suggest that Massoud ultimately survived the blast, but multiple senior Pakistani Taliban members were killed, and Pakistan reportedly carried out other airstrikes elsewhere across Afghanistan.
By the way, not necessarily related to this, but often happens with this too. You hear about false flag operations where people will stage an attack and then it just with the goal of it creating a larger justification.
On that same day, the Pakistani Taliban carried out retaliatory attacks, killing 7 police officers, a training academy, and 11 more soldiers in an additional convoy ambush. A third attack left 3 civilians and 2 paramilitary fighters allied with Pakistan's government dead in the district of Bajar. Also, that becomes the big thing is once
civilians start getting involved, but then you'll hear the claim where it's they weren't actually civilians. We have good authority that they were terrorists or insurgents or something like that. You hear this kind of stuff all the time. That it just becomes a he said, she said thing. But
day, Pakistan reported the government dead in the district of Bajar. Also on that day, Pakistan reported that it had carried out multiple raids against Pakistani Taliban hideouts in the same zone as the first convoy ambush, killing a total of 30 of the insurgents group's fighters. By the overnight hours on October the 11th, headed into October 12th, it was already obvious that the regions where the Pakistani Taliban are at their strongest were on the brink of chaos. But on that night, it was the Afghan Taliban, not the Pakistani Taliban, who would engage in offensive action. Moving through the darkness across a disputed border zone, Afghan Taliban units carried out a series of retaliatory attacks as their way to answer Pakistan's alleged airstrikes in Kabul.
one of the other pieces of more of immediate context, we'll see if they get to it, but just to kind of also understand, is the domino effect that happened from the end of the U.S. war with the Taliban in Afghanistan that just ended again a couple years ago. But the refugee crisis that war had created for, I mean, literally 2 decades, right? And one of the places a lot of Afghan migrants went to was Pakistan. And Pakistan has had this like huge wave of immigration that the Pakistani government has been adamantly trying to deport those refugees, which has brought in a lot of drama between the two as well. So you see these domino effects. Again, you can go back as far as you want. You can go with ancient ethnicities, like with the Pashtun people, and then get into the imperialism of the 1800s, the imperialism of the 1900s, and then the wars in the 21st century. You know, there's so many different, almost like lines of dominoes. That's how history is. And it's how the present is created.
Led by a Taliban fighter who had been part of the movement since before 2001, Afghan troops attacked multiple military posts where they reported inflicting heavy casualties and capturing numerous points. Members of the Pakistani Taliban reportedly took part, although at the time it wasn't clear whether they'd had advanced knowledge of the coming attack or simply chose to join in once they became aware. Pakistan responded in force, mobilizing units close to the border and attacking Afghan Taliban guard posts wherever possible.
Yeah. So what the Pakistani government's saying is, hey, Afghanistan, you are supplying these Taliban in our country, you know, that are trying to like break off. But then the easy thing for Afghanistan, just say, oh, no, we got nothing to do. That's their own thing. When it's like, I mean, y'all are pretty tied together, it seems like. I don't know. I obviously don't know enough about the direct supply there, but it would seem pretty plausible that the Afghani Taliban is going to help the Pakistani Taliban.
Afghanistan attempted, at one point, to impose a unilateral ceasefire while fighting was still taking place, but Pakistan rejected the deal and fighting continued through to the morning. At that time, each side retreated to more defensible positions,
get out of here,
although the carnage they left in their wake became the subject of intense international dispute. According to the Afghan Taliban, their side suffered only 9 fighters killed and 18 or fewer injured, but they'd managed to kill 58 Pakistani soldiers and capture 25 Pakistani outposts. Pakistan, however, claimed to have lost only 23 soldiers, but stated that its forces had killed over 200 fighters from the Afghan Taliban and other groups. And
when you report, when groups at war report numbers, there's always, it seems like this dilemma where it's like, how accurate and how exhausting are we going to be about our own people dying? Because there's kind of this double-edged sword to it. It's like, if you say that a lot of your people have been killed by the enemy, then it maybe makes your cause be more supportive, right? Whether by the people inside of the country or third-party nations. But at the same time, it's like, well, if we say a lot of us have died, then it makes us look weak and we can't actually fight. And I guess you have to take that as like a case by case basis. But you know what I'm talking about? Like this double-edged coin of like, what do you want to promote? What kind of statistics are best for your cause? Now, definitely you're going to want to be able to say, you know, we have, I guess, you know, killed a lot of the confirmed enemies, whether they're like terrorist groups, insurgent groups, or whatever it is. Now, what you're not going to say is, you know, civilians, but you'll have no problem saying like we've killed this many of the enemy. But I think that would be a major PR thing that your nation would have to consider.
Claimed 21 of their 200 fighters from the Afghan Taliban and other groups, and claimed 21 of their outposts. Obviously, those stories, they don't match up, although both governments do have a history of obfuscating or minimizing their losses when possible and exaggerating the claims of damage they've inflicted on their adversaries.
Yep, exactly.
Pakistan did publish footage that allegedly depicted the destruction of Taliban outposts, but those videos have yet to be independently verified. After the violence on October the 12th, it was only a matter of time before the fighting
Nobody
began
fakes
again,
anything.
not least because Pakistan's leaders, including Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharaf, had vowed a retaliation in force. Afghan leaders matched Pakistan's rhetoric, insisting that any subsequent acts by Pakistan would draw a, quote, strong response from Afghanistan's fighters. Pakistan closed all border crossings along the 2,600-kilometer border between the two nations, and according to local Afghan sources, the nation carried out drone strikes in Afghanistan's southern provinces. Drone strikes continued on the following day in Kandahar province, and then the region fell quiet for just a bit over a day. But overnight on the 14th of October into the 15th, Pakistan alleged that the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban had opened fire, together pouring bullets and heavy munitions into Pakistan's territory. According to Pakistan, nobody was hurt, and the act seemed to be more of a show of force, though Pakistan did respond with mortar fire, which it claimed was responsible for the death of another 20 Taliban fighters.
Can I tell you an interesting thing I had heard? And if you are Pashtuni, maybe you can help with this, because there's a lot out of Pashtunis that have fled Afghanistan over the decades. There's actually a bunch of them in like the United States too. But one of the interesting features of many Pashtuni is a lighter eye color, which you see predominantly people with like a dark eye color. And I heard there was this like mythology that it came from when Alexander the Great and the Greeks had invaded, because they invaded all the way into Afghanistan, and that there's a descendancy of Greeks and this, like, I guess, European influence. Now, most Greeks weren't going to be like blue eyes necessarily, but maybe more had that, and that lighter color of eyes was a descendant of Greek ancestry, again, 2,000 years ago from Alexander the Great. So I don't know how much is truth, but I've heard that kind of almost like folklore. But I mean, we also know, though, I mean, if you do DNA testing, I mean, like, there's going to be Greek influence over a lot of people from, I mean, Alexander's empire was huge, and it created the whole Hellenistic culture of a lot of Greeks assimilated into some of these Persian cultures and then getting out towards Afghanistan. But I mean, the same can be said about people this area. They're going to have, you know, like Mongol blood, you know, it's just the history of warfare and immigration and all that stuff that happens over thousands of years. But anyways, I thought that was kind of an interesting story I had heard about Pashtuni light eye colors.
Within a few hours after that brief exchange, on the morning of October the 15th, the border zone was rocked by the worst phase of fighting yet. On that day, all hell broke loose across the border zone, with Afghan and Pakistani fighters firing on each other from afar, and each side reporting attempted infantry attacks against their positions. In Pakistan, the border city of Chaman came under heavy shelling from across the Pakistani border, where several civilians were reported to have been killed. Pakistani drones struck Afghan positions near the border, while airstrikes hit the Afghan Taliban headquarters in Kandahar and rained down again, this time repeatedly, across the capital.
Kandahar, major city, Kabul, obviously the capital.
Showed antique tanks under the Afghan Taliban's control, rolling toward the border to assist an estimated 700 Taliban fighters or more who had arrived just before the fighting broke out and took up positions to bolster their allies who were already present in the border zone.
By the way, the Taliban also has some origination from the Afghan-Soviet War. The Mujahideen, as they were called, which actually brought in a coalition of a lot of people across the Islamic world as part of the Islamic revival that really, you know, got big in the 1970s and then in the 1980s when the war goes on there. But a lot of those people that were, you know, fighting and had success against the Soviet Union basically are going to be able to become governors and a major governing body in Afghanistan, a competing government body, depending on who you asked, about legitimate governments inside of Afghanistan over the past 50 years. But a lot of them were, you know, again, former Mujahideen and people that become more radicalized in the Islamic revival of the 1970s that you're going to see across the Islamic world. Some of those even breaking off and creating groups like Al-Qaeda, which had fought, led by Osama bin Laden, who, you know, was a Saudi, but had gone and participated there in the Soviet-Afghan war. Which interestingly also was, remember, if you didn't know, supported by the CIA, because, you know, anybody in the Cold War era that's going to fight the Soviets, you're going to get backing by the United States, financially, militarily, etc.
Pakistan admitted the loss of at least 7 Pakistani soldiers, while Afghanistan claimed at least 15 of its own civilians killed and over 80 women and children wounded in the district of Spin Boldak. On both sides, the true death toll is expected to be a good deal higher, while it currently appears that Afghanistan suffered the loss of significant amounts of heavy fighting equipment, including multiple tanks. If there was one bright spot amidst all the death and destruction, it was that the fighting on the 15th didn't last long. By the late afternoon, both Pakistan and Afghanistan had agreed to a ceasefire. It wasn't slated to last very long.
And actually
Instead,
carried it
will
out.
expire in the late afternoon on Friday the 17th, local time at the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, unless it's extended between now and then.
Ceasefires are way easier said than done to actually come to fruition because, again, you know, is everybody that's participating in this going to abide by it? I mean, some people might be like, no, I'm not going to do some ceasefire. That's cowardice. You know, I wasn't asked about it. And they go and do their own thing, or, you know, some kind of accident happens and it ruins a ceasefire. See that kind of stuff happening. Ceasefire that's going on in Israel and with Gaza has similar things that happen with that, with these ceasefires, but then there'll still be these moments of violence that come out. Makes it hard.
But, at least for now, the fighting is on pause.
And now a quick word from our sponsor, me, or more precisely, my website, fronts.co. Have you ever found yourself thinking, you know, there's just not enough content on
you ever found
Warfronts.
yourself
6 videos
to
a
be
week
Jesus?
is just not enough for me. I want the world to be crazier. I want more war, more death. Well, one, oh, what's wrong
Ew.
with you? And
No.
two, well, great news. Extra Warfronts content is now at your fingertips over at
Doesn't mean it's not important to
fronts.co.
understand.
Look at that. Look at that. Yes, starting this very week, we'll be posting 2 exclusive videos every week to our new
How
subscriber
do you get
only
on
website,
Fronts?
fronts.co. For just $5 a month, you'll gain access to brand new Warfronts content that won't be available on YouTube. Our first videos are already up, exploring topics as timely
That's just in
as
the
whether
last
Poland
Warfronts
could
video,
win
but
the war
how- I
against
wonder how many
Russia,
people he's
and
got
as
working for him these
timeless
days.
As how South
got
Korea
so many
came to
channels
build
and now
the
these
best
different media
tank on
platforms.
Earth, and to sweeten the deal, we're also asking our writers to contribute 2 in-depth written articles each week, exploring some unusual or less appreciated angle on geopolitics and warfare. So, not only will you get more of the videos,
What other
you love, you'll also
geopolitics
get a
channels
chance to
do you
read
guys
some of our
like?
writers' unfiltered
I'll do
takes
Chris
on war
Cappy,
news. So look, if you
Preston
like this channel,
Stewart I've
you'll love
done.
Fronts.co. Again, $5 a month.
Habitual
It
line
helps
crosser,
support
if you
us
consider
here
him one
at
of
Fronts,
those.
War Fronts, Political Fronts, and
Even though it's
Fronts.co.
usually joking.
And nothing is changing here. I have learned from the mistakes of past YouTubers. We are not doing a paywall on any existing content. The 6 videos a week will
It's
be here
just
for
additional.
you just as before. It's all just gravy, baby. Don't know why I went all Austin Powers there. But yeah, Fronts.co. Just go there. Good domain, right? It was expensive.
All right, pressure cooker.
Although we've explained the immediate run-up to this series of cross-border clashes, we haven't yet explained the larger context and the pattern of escalating tensions that Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Pakistani Taliban have dealt with for years. Although the Pakistani Taliban have posed a threat to Islamabad for many years, the fighting really picked up after Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan was removed from office in 2022. Khan had been overseeing efforts to strike a ceasefire deal with the Pakistani Taliban in negotiations that were actually brokered at times by the Afghan Taliban, but Pakistan's leaders after Imran Khan have preferred a far more punitive approach.
With
During the
Erdogan?
first of this year and the end of September, Pakistani authorities have been broadening their crackdown against the group, with the Islamabad-based Center for Research and Security Studies counting 2,414 deaths in that 9-month span. If those numbers hold consistent, then 2025 will be a far deadlier year for Pakistan's anti-Taliban operations than 2024. The Pakistani Taliban bear massive responsibility for the increased death toll after increasing the pace of suicide attacks, ambushes, and other assaults across the country, especially in the north. According to the
Just going to bring into question in the end, like no matter whatever happens here, what's going to happen to the Pakistani Taliban? Is there any world where they can coexist with Pakistan? Okay, the borders, you know, that border, that southern border with Pakistan has never been fully agreed upon by so many people in Afghanistan, especially going to be with the Taliban. And so much of it, again, is because of the border that separates, millions of Pashtun people, the major indigenous group for Afghanistan. Pakistan, in what reality would they give up that territory? Especially when hasn't been done peacefully or isn't done peacefully because of the amount of insurgency that's happened there. Not going to want to give up land and just enable, I guess, violent insurgencies. Seems you're at an impasse. Like what do you do other than have ceasefires and try to coexist without actually agreeing on anything, just being in a constant state of limbo and negotiations, like never ending.
CLED, the Pakistani Taliban have launched over 600 attacks this year so far, more than 2 a day, and on pace to be their most active year in the last decade. At the same time, Pakistan's relations
do they think that's going to work?
Have continued to deteriorate, not least
actually
because
achieve
Pakistan intermittently conducts airstrikes on Afghan soil, targeting what it claims are hideouts for the Pakistani Taliban. The government in Afghanistan has always taken umbrage to those strikes, although Pakistan's operations haven't typically led to direct escalation since, until now, they haven't targeted major population centers, least of all Kabul. At the same time, even though Afghanistan denies supporting the Pakistani Taliban, the government there is very hesitant to take any action against the group. Try that, and hardliners within the Afghan governments would likely take the side of the Pakistani Taliban, bringing their fighters with them. And if those fighters lose faith in the Afghan Taliban, they'd be prone to ideological drifting in an even more extreme direction, where the Islamic State franchise in Khorasan would most likely be eager to accept them.
True.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's suspicions about the Afghan Taliban were only exacerbated on the 15th of October when, even as fighting was spinning up again, Afghanistan's foreign minister was on a historic trip to build ties in India. As for what happens now, the most important question is...
No greater enemy of Pakistan, actually, than India. Be eager to help, but at the same time, they're not. It's like India's not just going to be waving pro-Afghanistan Taliban stuff. Not going to want to praise any of them involved.
Whether these two sides will be able to draw down tensions before the current ceasefire lapses.
Especially among the Hindu majority
According
in
to
India.
international sources and mediators, both Pakistan and Afghanistan have signaled some willingness to scale down the violence, so, at least for now, there is reason to be guardedly optimistic. But in the event that a more extended ceasefire arrangement doesn't emerge in the mere 48 hours available, we've got to be asking a second question: could this crisis spiral into all-out war? Luckily, we do have some good news on that front, specifically that it's highly unlikely that a true conventional war is even feasible. That's not for any lack of will on either side. Instead, it's a matter of the limitations that the Afghan Taliban faces.
Right.
Although the nation...
because it's been largely insurgent warfare that the Taliban in Afghanistan have dealt with, from dealing with the United States for so long and then dealing with the Soviet Union before that. But they also excel at it. But those are defensive wars.
Captured quite a lot of American-made kit from its 2021 takeover. It still lacks the heavy armor, the aircraft, the intelligence-gathering capabilities, and the high-caliber fighters it would need to wage a proper... A
lot of those kind of duds, but
Pakistan, by contrast, fields the world's 6th largest military, if we're just going by the numbers, and it's got over 1,000 relatively advanced main battle tanks and many thousands of individual artillery pieces on the ground, plus nearly 400 operational combat jets in the sky, including America's F-16s and China's J-10Cs. If the Afghan Taliban were to try and fight a conventional war...
Remember, Pakistan early in their independence was an ally of the United States, had support from that. India, when it got its independence, was part of the non-aligned movement, not wanting to directly align the Soviet Union or the United States. But Pakistan in their infancy in the United States had a pretty strong connection, if you did not know.
Against Pakistan is... If the Afghan Taliban were to try and fight a conventional war against Pakistan, it would not be a close fight, and both sides know that. But that relatively good news only extends so far because the kind of warfare that the Afghan Taliban are good at, they're really good at, informed by decades of experience.
Defeat multiple superpowers,
the Americans and
British,
also
the Russians, the Americans.
Further back in history. Whether it's the Afghan Taliban we're discussing or the Pakistani
Alexander
Taliban,
the Great.
One thing is entirely consistent. Their fighters thrive
Kick the Greeks out
in chaotic, asymmetric style of classical insurgent warfare. Across much of Afghanistan and much of Pakistan, their fighters can blend in with the local ethnic Pashtun population who live and move basically unrestricted in the border zone between the two nations. Afghanistan's forces can't beat Pakistan outright, but they can draw Pakistan into a protracted conflict and bleed their more powerful neighbors dry. And making matters worse, that's precisely the kind of warfare where modern Pakistan struggles most. The Pakistani Taliban pose a major security threat across Pakistan, but they're far from the only insurgent group that Islamabad has to deal with. In the country's Balochistan region, ethnic Baloch separatists have proven all but impossible for Pakistan's forces
I know nothing
to stop.
about that
the Islamic
region.
State maintains a presence in Pakistan. There's
an ISIS group there?
Anti-Pakistan militant groups in the disputed Kashmir region, and other ethnic and religious insurgencies occasionally carry out attacks of their own. For a nation that's...
By the way, I can't blame you if this all gets just so confusing with all these different groups, and it's like who's aligned with who. He was like Pakistan Taliban, Afghanistan Taliban, but then they'll get involved. They'll have problems with each other, plus the countries that they operate in. And then you have these third party groups that are like, y'all ain't going far enough, and levels of radicalism. Then you have just the everyday folks that are just like caught in the middle of this and have been so for decades that just don't want to see any of these groups come to power if they can help it. Think about it, it may make you feel kind of blessed, depending on where you live in the world, if you don't deal with these types of divisions and this type of violence. Or maybe it just seems minuscule what's going on in your country as compared to what so many people in other countries have to deal with. And, you know, when we look at the big picture, what are real problems? Which places are having real problems? And which ones are having, you know, minor problems? Count your blessings if you're living in a place that kind of real safety.
Ethnic and religious insurgencies occasionally carry out attacks of their own. For a nation that's rightfully regarded as a regional power player, armed with a full arsenal of nuclear weapons, Pakistan's internal security situation is astonishingly
Afghanistan
bad.
does not.
And that's before the Afghan Taliban had reason to consider actively expanding and funding the Pakistani Taliban insurgency. As whether Afghanistan really would do such a thing, unfortunately, the jury is still out. In the wake of the first flare of violence on October the 12th, most regional experts suggested that there was still ample room to de-escalate and that the Afghan Taliban would be inclined to pursue off-ramps away from future hostilities.
It almost makes you wonder if, you know, groups like that are just very willing and totally fine with the idea of just permanent war. Just to continue to give validation to your like revolutionary beliefs or whatever it is you're pursuing socially and politically, which you don't want anybody to be like, because it becomes a problem for everyone.
Now, however, these assessments are starting to change after Pakistan has demonstrated a willingness to strike Kabul with impunity and has signaled that it may believe it has nothing to fear from Afghanistan besides limited border skirmishes. Remember, according to the conventional balance of power, it is Pakistan that has the clear upper hand. But it's up to Afghanistan to either make its peace with the current order of things or to...
But that's the thing, okay, Pakistan has the upper hand. Well, like, said the same thing about the United States, right? Same thing about the Soviet Union. These were superpowers that both failed there. So what's Pakistan going to do?
change the regional dynamic by scaling up asymmetric warfare. There is one other stroke of luck to consider.
You guys heard the whole idea? You ever heard of the phrase that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires? Because of that history, nobody succeeds there. Foreign groups just don't. They struggle and fail.
Scaling up asymmetric warfare. There is one other stroke of luck to consider. That the international community is poised to come down firmly on Pakistan's side while also being able to engage Afghanistan.
Who's going to care, though?
Whether it's China, Russia, the United States, the...
Well, I should say, I mean, President Trump loves the idea of being like intermediary between countries, whether it's to a large extent or to a small extent. You'll see him. He loves to talk about that and loves to get credit for that. You know, being the cause of people at war coming to peace. Loves that. So, I mean, I guess that could be a thing. But do you really see like President Trump sitting at a table with the Taliban on one end and then like the Pakistani government on one side? Maybe. Does he and the administration know the deep rooted causes of these things? because that's so important to understand if you're talking about permanent details. If you completely base it on just the current immediate issues and not the deeper ones, then all you're doing is prolonging the inevitable, which is just another conflict down the road.
European Union or any other geopolitically relevant force besides India all would prefer to see Pakistan safe and stable and would strongly prefer to see this issue resolved through negotiations. China
True,
has
because everyone's already, the world has already been used to a destabilized Afghanistan. They don't want a Pakistan to do that. India is not going to want that because they already have, so much beef with Pakistan. They're not going to want to see destabilization on that side because, again, they're not just like fans of the Afghani Taliban, obviously. Could provide an opportunity for China to get involved, which is more likely to get involved in places like that are, get closer and closer to their territory. So will Xi come in?
Strongly prefer to see this issue resolved through negotiations. China has substantial material assets in both nations and consistently applies leverage in other international conflicts to ensure that China's assets never come under threat.
I'm going to look out for
The
China.
United States has its own recent pretext to support Pakistan directly as part of a hypothetical effort to recapture Bagram Air Force Base. Russia can threaten an end to its reconciliation
ends
with
of the
Afghanistan after becoming the first nation in the world to recognize the Taliban-controlled government. Saudi Arabia recently signed a mutual defense pact with Pakistan and would rather not invoke it so soon, especially against a fellow Muslim nation. And the Afghan Taliban knows full well.
Saudi Arabia has no problem being at beef with other Islamic nations. They've done that repeatedly since the House of Saud really took over.
Soon, especially against a fellow Muslim nation. And the Afghan Taliban knows full well.
Too much of an oversimplification. There's so much of that happens where it's like, well, they're both Muslim, therefore they're just going to like naturally be friends. It's not the case. You can't paint that type of broad stroke over 1 billion people. In the same way outsiders in the European wars of religion, where it's like, well, they're all just Christians. They'll just get along. Well, okay. Well, there's Protestants, and then there's Catholics, and then there's all the different Protestants within Protestantism, and then you got the Orthodox and the Catholic, and like, okay, if you're in those areas, you understand that it's not as unified as you think you are if you're from the outside. And the West does the same thing with the Islamic world.
Got in its way, there is no chance that they'd ever be in charge of their nation. For the sake of its own survival, Afghanistan cannot afford to give the world justification in backing military operations to destroy what's left of its arsenal. Hopefully, the world already knows more about the situation by the time you see this episode, and soon, Pakistan and Afghanistan will be able to agree on a path forward toward a more enduring peace. But right now, these two South Asian nations are at each other's throats, and unfortunately, there are no guarantees that peace is going to prevail.
Of course.
Thank you.
Final thoughts. All right. So, I learned especially about the more immediate stuff. They went into very little to no historical context going back further than, even just a few weeks. I thought they might bring in more of just the domino effect of the destabilization of Afghanistan with the war with the United States, and then just the Pashtun. I thought they would talk a lot more about the Pashtun issue and how the borders have created a major issue for that major ethnic group that's split across borders. And just the border itself, that was something severely lacking in this, as it was such a big piece of drama from the decolonization era and the creation of Pakistan. So anyway, there's a lot of context. There's a lot more you can get into, and I only scratched the surface of this. So I would implore you to look a lot more into the history of that region when it comes to the groups that are there, but then also how these groups have been impacted by foreign third-party nations, because you have to put all of those pieces together to understand this and to get closer to some kind of solution to the problems there. All right. With that, we'll see y'all next time.